No one can afford to live. No one can afford to live anymore. Just kind of weird. Wasn't always like that. We all broke now. We all broke. You might be one person out there. I ain't broke. Good for you. But the majority of people are broke, right? The disparity between the bottom and the top is growing, not at a steady rate. It's growing exponentially. The amount of people who are falling beneath the poverty line is increasing. And the cost of all the goods that we used to consider niceties, right, are way out of our reach. And even the price of the goods that we used to think of as essentials are now out of our reach as well. Starting a family, owning a house, having children. These are pretty big life milestones that you would want to continue to see happen. You want to see these metrics go up in a thriving society, in an advanced society, in a society that is, for the most part, conquered pathogens, it's conquered disease, it's conquered hunger for the most part. You want to see these numbers go up, but they're not. The number's actually trending down. And I just find that very interesting. Let me hit you with a couple statistics, right? A couple interesting bullet points. Housing affordability. 1970, the median home price was 17,000 big ones. Today, it's approximately 436,000. 25-fold increase. Very interesting. Rent increase. Average monthly rent has surged from $108 in 1970 to about $2,000 a month, marking an 18-fold increase. Pretty interesting. Wage stagnation. From 1973 to 2017, worker productivity grew by 74%, but hourly compensation for a typical worker rose by only 9%. Very interesting. Inflation versus wages. Between 1973 and 2023, the Consumer Price Index, which is the CPI, increased by 586%, while wages did not keep pace. Very interesting. Real wage growth. Adjusted for inflation, wages and salaries increased by just 1% over the 12 months ending in March 2025. Very interesting. Work hours for home ownership. In 1970, it took approximately 11,100 hours of minimum wage work to afford a new house. Today, it requires 51,000 hours. Very interesting. 50 years ago, a single income was often sufficient to support a family, purchase a home, and save for the future. Today, even dual income households struggle to meet basic living expenses, with housing, healthcare, education costs outpacing wage growth. The disparity between rising living costs and stagnant wages underscores the financial challenges faced by the current generation. Well said, ChatGPT. Thank you very much. But now it's all Gen Z BTC from here. And I'm here to tell you how we got into this situation. What is going on here, and how can we make it stop? If you're enjoying this video so far, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Also, if you're playing this video at more than 1x speed, let me know. Shout out to all my autistic, fast, sped up video watchers. You guys are the best. But let's start at the beginning, right? Let's start at the beginning, all right? How far back is the beginning? Are we going back to the prehistoric ages? We don't have to go that far back. All right, calm down. But what we do need to go back to is 1913. This is when we discovered the creature from Jekyll Island, right? The creature from Jekyll Island is a very powerful creature with multiple tentacles and a face that is unknown. It's a blurry face. It's a blank face. It is a faceless entity. Right? But that does not mean that it is not dangerous. It is a Cthulhu-like entity. And that Cthulhu-like entity is the Federal Reserve, established in 1913, colloquially referred to as the creature from Jekyll Island. And what the Federal Reserve does, essentially, is they set the price of money. All right? They set the interest rate for the country, essentially. Right? The main thing you need to know about the Federal Reserve is that they are not a federal agency. They do not have any reserves. All right? So the Federal Reserve is not a federal entity, and they do not have any reserves. They're a privately owned entity, Who owns them? I'm not going to get into that, but that's a nice rabbit hole. You can go down that one. You'll figure it out. I believe in you. So they're a privately owned entity, and they don't have any actual reserves. The Federal Reserve doesn't have just like money or gold in a vault somewhere or something like that. Like they print money. They're essentially in charge of the mint. So technically they have an infinite amount of money. All right. One of the chairmen or one of the directors of the Federal Reserve literally said this on record. He said the quiet part out loud. There's an infinite amount of money sitting at the Federal Reserve. There's an infinite amount of money sitting at the Federal Reserve. So because of that, this Federal Reserve has a very, very, very big role to play in the way that inflation works in the country, right? That CPI number, this consumer price index number that we just talked about, they have a very big role in determining that as well. So since the establishment of the Federal Reserve in 1913, things kind of started to change, right? Because we slowly started to move away from being on a gold standard and moving towards being on a fiat standard. So what was the gold standard? The gold standard was essentially when banks had to have a certain amount of gold inside of their vaults, and then they would have a certain amount of cash tied to that gold, right? So if you had a $20 bill, there needed to be $20 worth of gold in the vault somewhere. Each paper note was backed by a certain amount of gold, right? So that meant that the banks kind of had to fall in line, right? They couldn't get too crazy gambling with money, right? They couldn't just get too out of hand with gambling or printing up money or loaning out money that wasn't really there. That just wasn't as common, right? Because there were checks and balances in place there, right? Then we move off of the gold standard, right? I believe Nixon was the one who fully closed the convertibility of, dollars into gold, right? Back in 1971, it might have been. And once that happened, things really started to take off, right? That's where we really started to see a divergence in the amount of productivity that workers were creating for their large corporations and the amount of compensation that they were receiving from their employers that they were enriching, right? And part of that was the gold standard. And then another part of that was the debasement of the currency, right? So when you have a hard asset like gold, right? When you have a hard asset like gold and you no longer back the dollar with it, you no longer back the dollar or peg the dollar to gold, you don't back the dollar with anything. That means that now the issuers of money, the creators of money, have free range to print up as much as they want, right? And if you understand the concept of dilution, then what you'll realize is that eventually, if you print up a bunch of something, it becomes worthless because there's just so many of them in circulation. All right. To give you a real world, nice and easy example. Oh my God, my leg. Let's take ketchup, for example. Heinz ketchup. You got to love it, right? Now, this ketchup bottle is almost empty. It's almost empty, right? There's not that much ketchup left. I can maybe eat like 10 burgers with this amount of ketchup if I really stretch it. Now, if I wanted to expand the amount of ketchup I had without having to go buy more ketchup, I would just take the top off and fill this up with tap water, right? We would just water down the ketchup. All right. Now, you could say, hey, I got a full bottle of ketchup now because I filled the water up to like here, and then I shook it up. And technically, this is, 20% ketchup, 80% water. But I mean, it's still ketchup. It's got ketchup on the bottle. I can put it on the burger. It's just going to be a little liquidy, right? That's essentially what you're doing when you dilute something. You made the value of the ketchup go down. All right. If I was trying to sell that to someone, let's say it was a full bottle. I'm trying to sell a full bottle of ketchup for $3, right? Some people will be like, okay, I'll take that. $3 for ketchup. All right, I'll take that. If I try selling the diluted ketchup for $3, people are going to be disgusted. They're going to be like, oh my God, I don't want that. That's disgusting. You're an idiot. You've ruined it. You have ruined it. You've ruined the product. You've ruined the item. The Federal Reserve and the big banks in the country have ruined the product. They've ruined the dollar. That's the reason why you can't buy stuff like you used to with dollars. That's the reason why everything's going up in value. That's the reason why we broke. All right. And again, we're going to circle back to another topic here, which is corporate greed, right? We're going to speak on that because a lot of people tend to just try to place that as the main reason. No, 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 no. That is certainly a factor at some level, but it is much deeper than that. We have to get to the root cause. The root cause is debasement. All right. If the total amount of currency in the system goes from 100 million to 100 trillion, you have diluted the value of the currency by multiples, okay? If you were to have $50,000 back in 1970, that was way more money than it is today. The same way that if you have $50,000 in 1920, that was way more than it was in 1970. You understand what I'm saying? You could literally buy a steak for a quarter in 1920. You could then buy a steak for like $1 in 1970. Now you can buy a steak for maybe $7 or $8, and that's a pretty cheap steak, right? So over time, nothing has really changed between the product. It's the thing that we're using that has become a lot worse. All right. Let's take eggs. Another great example. 1920, eggs were not $15. You can go fact check that. 1970, eggs were not $15, but today eggs are $15. What has changed? They still come from chickens, right? They're still eggs, you know, they have yolks. They have a white shell, sometimes a brown one, sometimes a brown shell. But they're still eggs. But the price has exceedingly, exponentially grown. The eggs haven't changed. The money just buys you less stuff. So when you're able to reframe your mindset to realize, oh, my currency is just getting weaker, that's when you start to realize why everything around you is collapsing and crumbling and it's just not as good as it used to be, right? It's way more expensive and it's not as good as it used to be. You're being ripped off, all right? You're basically being scammed. And it's a horrible thing to see happen, but it is happening in real life and it's going to continue to happen. There's not going to be some moment where we magically, oh, we're going to reverse all of the inflation that we've done since 1913. Don't worry, guys. That's not coming. Not on a fiat standard, all right? Not on a government dollar standard, okay? Let's talk about corporations, right? Let's talk about corporate greed. Let's talk about business, okay? A lot of people will have you believe, oh, well, the reason why the price of everything is going up simultaneously, by the way, is because all the CEOs and business owners and investors are all working together to make the prices go up simultaneously. That's a lot of coordination, but no, that's not exactly what's happening. Don't get me wrong, there are some people who love price gouging, but not every CEO of every supermarket, whether it's a mom and pop shop or a conglomerate like Walmart, they're not all just raising their prices for fun and because they think, oh, we can just rip these guys off. Because, again, mom and pop shop, their prices are going up. Their prices are not the same as 1970. They're not the same as 1920. They're not the same as 1990. The prices are way higher today. So are mom and pop just getting greedier? Maybe. But I just find it interesting that every single store everywhere all at once is having all their products get more expensive. And the reason why that's happening is because they all use the same currency. They all use dollars, okay? And like I said a second ago, because dollars are losing value, the dollar is weakening, the dollar is getting debased, inflation is eating away at the purchasing power of every individual unit of the US's currency, right? Every US dollar buys you less stuff over time because of inflation. Inflation is not necessarily the rising of prices in products. Inflation is an expansion of the monetary supply. That's why they call it inflation. It's not that the prices are inflating per se, it's that the total amount of currency in circulation is inflating, which means that each unit of the currency has less purchasing power because the size of that network is being artificially inflated. All right. So when you have a business, even if it has really thin profit margins, you have to either make your profit margins slimmer or you need to find a way to create value for the people who are buying your stuff. You got to come up with something, right? So let's go ahead with the ketchup example again. Oh, my handy dandy ketchup. Gotta love ketchup, right? I love ketchup. I put it on everything. Let's say I'm a ketchup manufacturer, right? I started out on a small farm somewhere, all right? And just like Heinz, for 150 years, I've been making ketchup. And it's getting to the point where inflation is completely destroying my product. So really, as a producer of ketchup, I have three options. I'm going to go ahead and break down the three options for you. This is pretty much true for any business that sells a good or some sort of commodity, right? The first thing I can do is I can continue selling my ketchup for the price I've always sold it at. Let's say I've always sold ketchup for $1, right? Let's take it all the way back to 1920. I've always sold my ketchup for $1. Obviously, that's very expensive for 1920, but let's just say I sold it for $1. 1970, still selling it for $1. 2025, I'm still selling it for $1, right? The truth is, I would have already gone out of business within like the first 20 years because even if I'm selling the most ketchup out of everyone, I'm beating all my competitors, I'm not going to be able to sell ketchup for $1 for 100 years. Okay? Now, some of you might stop and say, well, Costco's been selling a hot dog for $1.50 and they haven't changed the price. Wow. That's a really good analysis, dude. Really nice. What about the price of everything else? Yeah. So, again, my only commodity is ketchup. I'm selling it for $1. I'm going to go out of business if I keep my price the same. Okay? Because inflation is eating away at my profit margins, which means that I cannot pay my employees, which means that I can't do anything. Right? And also, as the cost of living goes up, as the cost of everything goes up, if I keep the price of my ketchup $1, then I would have to keep my wages for my employees $1 most likely, right? Because there's no way I'm just growing, 1,000% year over year, every single year, in order to keep up with inflation, right? That's just not going to happen. So you keep the product price the same, not going to happen. You're not going to make it. That's not going to work. So prices have to kind of rise, right? Let's say my other solution is I can keep selling it for $1. But one thing I can do is like this, right? I just fill the bottle up with like 10% ketchup. And then the rest of it's just water, right? So I can literally water down my product. I can literally make my product worse and then sell it for the same price. That is something I can do. Now, of course, the risk of that is my product sucks now. All of my customers hate my cheap, sucky product. They leave. I'm once again out of business. I'm cooked, right? So I'm selling $1 ketchup. It's mostly water. It's disgusting. Oh my God, sorry about that. And they hate it. They hate it and they're gone. I'm broke. My business is done. All my employees are fired. They're laid off. It's garbage. It's a tragedy. My third option is that I can raise my prices ever so slightly more than the rate of inflation, right? So if the rate of inflation is approximately 7% a year, I can raise the price of my ketchup 7.5%, make a little bit of an arbitrage there, right? While also finding ways to beat my competitors, whatever it might be. Prices are pretty much naturally incentivized to keep pace with the rate of inflation, right? But the truth is people aren't going to just raise their prices 7%. They're going to raise it more than that. They're going to raise it 10%, 15%. That's why we see the price of eggs massively outpacing the CPI rate of inflation, the government stated rate of inflation, right? And that's where we find ourselves in this predicament today, right? The government stated rate of inflation might be, 600% over the last 50 years, But again, the price of eggs over the last 50 years is up more than that. The price of a house over the last 50 years is up way more than that. The price of healthcare for a child is up way more than that, right? Because CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index, just anytime you hear CPI, just think government inflation number. That's the government inflation number. That's the inflation number that the government is saying out loud to the public. The CPI is a lie. And that's not just me coping or coming up with some random thing. You can look this up. CPI is a lie because CPI is a market basket of goods that's handpicked by the Fed, right? By the Federal Reserve. They pick what's included in CPI. So let's just say that the price of coffee beans is up 500% and the cost of Netflix and Domino's is only up 20%. The Fed can decide to remove coffee beans from the calculation. That way, when the inflation numbers come out, it shows, oh, really, it wasn't that bad. See, Netflix and Domino's are only up 20%. And, don't worry about all that other stuff. We remove that. The rate of inflation is only 2%, guys. Don't worry about it. All the stuff that we handpicked, yeah, if we add it all up and average it out, inflation is only 2%. It's really not that bad. You can check the inflation numbers every month. Every single month, they go over the inflation numbers. Just recently, inflation was 2.3%. Not bad. In fact, it beat expectations. The expectation was going to be 2.5%. No, we beat the expectations. Inflation's way lower. Just so you know, every time they do that, really what they're saying is like the compounded inflation since like 100 years ago to today, compounding over time, we only increased inflation by 2.3% this month. You know what I mean? So like the next month, if it's 2.3% again, you have to factor in that previous 2.3%. So inflation is a compounding thing. It's always adding on to itself. The only way that we'd be undoing inflation is if we had a negative inflation rate, which we don't, because they're constantly printing money. They're constantly debasing the currency. They're constantly making you poorer. And the thing that's interesting about that is you didn't vote for that. You know what I mean? Like you were never considered in that. There was never an election to elect Jerome Powell or the other heads and chairs of the Federal Reserve and the decisions that they make. We didn't have any decision on whether they raised the interest rate or whether they cut the interest rate. They know best. You know why? Because they went to school for what they're doing. And by went to school, I mean they went to some yuppie Yale-style college and they just knew somebody and then they kind of put them in that position. And also, they might have studied one or two economics classes that are highly outdated and irrelevant in today's markets. So yeah, that's great. They're highly qualified, clearly. So that's essentially how we find ourselves in the predicament that we're in, right? We give the Federal Reserve all the power over the amount of money that's issued in the system. We get poorer at 2% a month, pretty much, compounding over time. And why 2%, by the way? Why 2%? The target rate for the Fed is 2%. Why is that? Because basically you lose half of your stuff every 50 years. So basically every generation has about half as much stuff as the last one. So you're getting poorer so slowly that you barely even recognize it, right? You barely even notice it. And that's also why a lot of companies, at least some companies I've worked for, like Target, big box stores, when you do really good at your job, they gave us a review, right, every year. And then if you did amazing, I mean, you were just busting your butt at the job, you're a real corporate guy, you're a real bootlicker, you got a 3 on your review. And a 3 means that you get a 3 means that you get a it was a 4% raise, right? You get a 4% raise. Not bad, right? Not bad. But the only problem is you got a 4% raise for the year, and inflation is literally like 2%, a month compounding. You know what I mean? So, yeah. And also, that's the CPI. Again, they're lying about the CPI. The true rate of inflation at any given time is around 7%, right? The true rate of currency debasement at any given time in the United States is around 7%. That's about the average. And that's pretty bad. Right, especially when you consider that the S&P return, right, the return of the S&P 500 is around 7% on average. So the inflation rate 7 to 10%. The S&P returns about 7 to 10% every year on average, And what you realize is that even if you're saving your 401k or something like that, the S&P 500 is only keeping pace exactly, in tow with the rate of inflation. So if you're investing in the S&P 500, you're not really getting richer. You're just running in place. You're just on a hamster wheel. You're just walking on a treadmill. You're not going anywhere. You're moving without going anywhere, right? And once you realize that, you start to realize that you're only keeping pace with your purchasing power. Your purchasing power is not increasing. So just to keep pace with inflation, you essentially have to be a gambler of some kind, right? You have to put your money into the S&P 500, which is basically carried by the top 7 companies. They carry basically 80% of all of the gains of the S&P 500 because the S&P 500 sucks. All the other 490 companies suck. They're horrible. Most of them are losing money. All right. They don't have any, way of competing with the top 7 guys because those guys basically have a monopoly on the market. And without those 7 guys, the S&P would completely collapse. It would crumble. It would have no gains. It would be losing money. It would be more negative than bonds. It would be more negative than treasuries if it weren't for the Magnificent Seven, right? And the Mag 7 is like Meta, which is Facebook, Tesla, Google, Amazon, Nvidia, some Apple, I don't know, some other garbage companies. No one really cares. Netflix, I don't know, whatever. So without them, the U.S. stock market basically sucks and goes to zero, right? Because the other companies aren't doing anything. They're just horrible. And they're losing money. So if you want to just keep pace, you have to gamble on the Magnificent Seven. You have to gamble on the S&P 500, right? And then if you want to actually grow your purchasing power, you want to grow your net worth, you want to grow your amount of stuff that you're able to purchase, right? Then you're going to have to really start gambling, right? And I really do mean that. You're going to have to start gambling. You're going to have to start making parlays. You're going to start betting on horses. You're going to start betting on competitive water polo. You don't even watch that. You know what I mean? You're going to have to start betting on weird stuff. You're starting to bet on sumo wrestling. You know what I mean? You're starting to bet on seahorse racing. You're betting on the Puppy Bowl. You know what I mean? You're turning into a true degenerate. And the reason why that's happening, there's also a gambling epidemic. I'm going to do a video about that too. The gambling epidemic is stemming from the fact that people want purchasing power. There's the rush of gambling, but like most people don't actually like gambling. They're gambling because they want money. They're gambling because they want to be able to get ahead. That's why people buy scratch offs. They're not buying scratch offs because it's just so fun. Oh, the rush of scratching the lottery ticket. No, it's because they want to try to increase their purchasing power. They want to try to bring their consumption into the present by getting a lot of money at one time. So think of it this way, right? When you go to work, you look at that calendar, you see that your schedule is booked Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, all the way from now to 2060. All right. For a fact you're going to be working at that dead end job, going in there with all those people that you hate, but you have to fake like you like in order for you to get a check that is just meager enough for you to keep your head above water. All right. Sound familiar? Yeah, we all broke. So you go ahead and you do that. And you know that your time is booked from now to 2060. You know that. But when you buy a scratcher, what you're buying is the opportunity to take all those years, all those days on the calendar, all that time from the future and bring it to the present. Because if over the course of now to 2060, you're going to make let's just call it $5 million over the course of that entire time, which means that you're only making like 30,000 or 40,000 a year, whatever it comes out to. If you could bring all that consumption, all that work, all that time into the present, you could open up your schedule in the future. You wouldn't have to do 9 to 5 all the way from now to 2060. All the work would be done for you and you'd get all the cash up front. That's what it means to hit the lottery. It's an early retirement if you're not an idiot. Most people are idiots. So if you win the lottery, you're actually going to just end up going broke and going back to work. But that's the reason people gamble. That's the reason people do degenerate things. That's the reason why people torment people online and in public or whatever it might be. That's the reason people degrade themselves online. That's the reason why people are willing to murder, willing to, do the unspeakable because they want to try to free up their future calendar by any means necessary. Literally get rich or die trying, and just like 50, they don't back down, so that's the only way that a lot of people see it. It's either this or, you know, 60 years of wage slavery. So they go ahead, they try to risk it. They go ahead every single check. Maybe this one, maybe this one, maybe this one. And it ends up just being a tax on the person because over long time periods, gambling is never meant to pay off, right? Like casinos wouldn't work if long term they were just meant to just give all their money away. That's not how a casino operates. A casino operates so that over long time periods, you're guaranteed to lose your money. The house always has an edge. That's why it's best to like be quick when you gamble. One or two quick hits and then leave. Because over a long time period, you'll always lose. That's how the casino's constructed. And people, regardless of that fact, are willing to try their luck every day because they have a feeling of hopelessness, right? They have a feeling of, oh my God, I'm literally stuck. I'm going to be in the we broke situation forever. The situation's never going to change. It's never going to get any better. Like, I have to do this. This is really my only out. I have no other skills. I have no other talents. I have no reason to believe in myself. I have no future. I have no hope. I have no prospects. I have no money. I have no girlfriend. I have no boyfriend. I have no wife. I have no husband. I have no father. I have no kids. I have nothing. I have nothing. I have nothing except for student loan debt and a lot of regrets, right? That's the average person pretty much in a nutshell. So it kind of makes sense, you know what I mean? And the government's not coming to help you. No matter how much you love Donald Trump, he's not just going to come and give you your salvation on a silver platter as much as you might want him to do that. It's not going to happen, right? And there are a lot of powers that be that don't really care, right? All they care about is that lobbyist putting that check in front of them and then having them vote yes or no on whatever thing that they just paid them to say yes or no on, right? So they ain't coming to help you either. Don't sit around for some politician to come and help you. At the end of the day, part of it is that you got to help yourself. But if there was anyone who was ever trying to look out for you, who was trying to give you a tool that might be somewhat useful to you in this fight against being broke, in this fight against the Federal Reserve, in this fight against a system of money that's built on all these layers of trust, it would probably be Satoshi, right? Satoshi did give you one little tool that might be useful to you. And that little tool was digital gold. He found a way to turn this into electricity, right? And to give it to 8 billion people, right? He found a way to give property rights to 8 billion people. And that's the reason why so many people, young and old, are turning to Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is that thing that makes it so that you can actually afford life. Bitcoin makes it affordable to live again. Bitcoin makes it possible to hope again. Bitcoin makes it possible for you to dream and not just have it be a daydream, have it actually be a reality. Bitcoin is a vehicle by which you can actually move towards your dream, save towards your dream, make strides towards your dream until it's real. And then from there, you have hope because you actually did it. You did it. And now you're like, man, what else can I do? Now you're energized. Now you're ready to get after it. Now you can do anything. But until you do that first one, it's kind of tough. Really, it's just delusion if you're just sitting around talking about how you're going to do this and that, and your savings vehicle continues to get destroyed. It's very tough. Now, some people will sit there and they'll say, well, I can't afford a whole Bitcoin, so how's that going to help me? The truth is, you can just buy $10 worth of Bitcoin. That is true. And it's not going to help you to achieve your dreams or make you rich or get out of poverty in one day. It will take a long time. I'd say it's 5 years. 5 years it takes for Bitcoin to upgrade your situation, right? A lot of people already rolling their eyes, turning off the video. Oh, I can't do that. I'm just going to go gamble for 5 more years. Okay, that's fine. I mean, you're already 10 years deep, 15 years deep in gambling, 20 years deep, 30 years deep in gambling? You still working, so I don't know. Hey, but I mean, what do I know? You probably know better than I do. But the truth is, every 5 years, right, the absolute worst outcome for you, no matter what time you bought it with Bitcoin, is that you double your money. You double your purchasing power. That is a true statement. It does not matter what 5-year period you're looking at, every 5 years, you will have bare minimum double your money. Now, historically, every 5-year period, Bitcoin more so, it's closer to like 4 or 5 times your money if we're doing like an average. But the compound annual growth rate for Bitcoin consistently hovers around, 40 to 60%, right? So essentially every 2 years, you're actually doubling your purchasing power when you hold Bitcoin, right? On average. But the reason why this happens is because Bitcoin has a fixed amount. There's only 21 million, right? So because there's a finite amount of the thing, it holds its value very well, right? It's like gold. Gold, you can't just, find gold on the street. It's pretty hard to produce gold. You got to know where to mine it. Then you got to go mine it. Then once you go to mine it, you have to bring it to a facility. You have to refine it. Then once you refine it, you have to shape it and do whatever you got to do with it. Turn it into a gold bar, turn it into jewelry, whatever. And it takes a lot of work. If I were to present a gold bar to you, you would know that there was a lot of work that went into that. I didn't just make that in my room on a random Sunday night. There was a lot of work, a lot of history, right? The earth had to churn all that gold out from magma into, deposits, into sediments in the rock. And then someone had to go dig it up. The gold that was sitting there, it was millions of years in the making, right? It didn't just get there overnight. It was a lot of work, not just by people, but by the earth itself, by the universe itself, by acts of God. It took a lot of work for that gold to get there. That's proof of work right in front of you. If you see someone with a very toned body, if they're in great shape, great health, they're a great athlete, even if they're on steroids, right, which is a little bit of a cheat, a little bit of a shortcut, you're not just going to turn into a bodybuilder because you stabbed up steroids. You still had to go lift weights every single day, and you had to watch your diet every single day. You know what I mean? You had to put in a proof of work in order for people to know, oh, wow, that's an in-shape guy. That guy's ripped. Look at how he's running and jumping. Look at how athletic he is. Yeah, that's a lot of work. That's proof of work. He didn't just wake up like that. That's why stuff like that has value. You can't fake it. You can't forge it. It's highly difficult to produce. That's what Bitcoin is, except it's just digital. All right. Bitcoin is the digital version of a ripped physique. Bitcoin is literally digital gold. All right. Bitcoin is digital proof of work. Because if I present a Bitcoin to you, you can be guaranteed that that Bitcoin took a lot of work to produce. You can verify on the blockchain that it took work to produce. And then from there, you know that there's a lot of value stored in that Bitcoin because a lot of people with a lot of computers all over the world were mining and sending electricity and sending energy and dedicating time to try to mine those Bitcoins. The same way that a lot of people had to dedicate time and energy and electricity and manpower and hours to go over to the gold mines, to the cobalt mines, to the silver mines, to the diamond mines to mine those items. Even a diamond that's grown in a lab. Can you make a diamond lab? Do you know how hard that is to do? It still takes work to produce something like that. All right. You cannot just produce a bunch of them out of thin air. It's not like the earth is just 76% diamonds. All right. That's why these things have a certain level of value to them. They're not just all over the place. There's not just 100 million of them. You can't just print 10 times more at a whim. That's the reason why the dollar has little value compared to these items. You can print dollars ad infinitum. You can print an infinite amount of dollars with little to no effort, especially because we're not just printing bills anymore at a mint, which takes parchment and wood and paper and water and cotton. You can now just digitally send $100 million on a digital ledger from the Federal Reserve and then send that to another bank. And then they can send that to a company. They can send that to JP Morgan on his yacht. And then he can send it to Jeffrey Epstein. You can just do that on a computer. That didn't take anything. It took little to no energy to create a bunch of value. That's fake value. That's where the dilution comes from. You didn't actually create value anywhere. You didn't create a product that was generating, quality of life improvements for people. You didn't create something that was actually generating revenue. You just printed money out of thin air and made everyone else poorer by making yourself richer. That's called a quintillionaire, or the quintillion effect. If you're close to the money printer, you keep getting richer because you print money for yourself and then you don't really give any to anyone else. But regardless of that fact, eventually the pain of money printing trickles down to the normies and all the wages and all of the have-nots, while all the people who are close to the money printer keep getting richer because they're pocketing all the money, and then you get just a couple scraps, all right? Some people call that Reaganomics. Some people call it whatever you want to call it. But it's just pathetic, and it's theft. It's robbery. And Bitcoin just stops you from getting robbed. 2% inflation means you're getting robbed at 2%. Bitcoin's inflation rate is constantly getting cut in half. And if you understand inflation, if you understand Bitcoin, if you understand technological deflation, you realize that Bitcoin's actually a deflationary currency. That doesn't mean that the supply is decreasing of Bitcoin. It's getting cut in half, yes, but there's still only 21 million. Every 4 years, the amount of Bitcoin being released at one time is cut in half. But when you realize that technology makes everything cheaper, we live in a deflationary society, but inflation is just beating the rate of technological deflation because we're just printing money faster than technology can make our lives cheaper. That's when you start to realize that you're actually getting robbed exponentially. You're getting robbed way faster than you might think. That's going to be another full episode. Trust me, I can talk about it for an hour. But right now, I'm just going to try to wrap it up and focus on the fact that we are getting robbed by the Federal Reserve. And Bitcoin is a tool that allows people to reserve their purchasing power and grow their purchasing power so that they can plan for the future. Since Bitcoin is growing so much faster than the rate of inflation, it allows you to plan for the future. Because if you're in a situation where you're like, oh, okay, if I save up 5% of my income over this amount of time, then I'll have this amount of money to buy this asset, which is currently this price. Then you go ahead, you save for 10 years, then it's time to make your big purchase. But unfortunately, the thing that you were saving up for is now 3 times as much as you saved up for. But that wasn't the case 10 years ago when you were doing the math. So you're sitting there stumped. Now you're only at 1/3 of where you were supposed to be at for your goal. And you're like, what happened? The price of the asset ran away from you. I was going to save up for my down payment for my house, but I couldn't do it. I thought I did everything right. I stayed on track. I budgeted. I made my life suck more. I didn't do as much fun stuff. I didn't go on any vacations. I didn't take time off. I didn't spend time with my family. I didn't buy things for myself. And I still didn't get the thing that I saved up for, that I planned for. What happened? Did I do something wrong? Technically, yeah, you did. You saved in the wrong instrument. You saved all your money in dollars. You put all your money in a briefcase. You saved all your money under your mattress. 10 years later, oh, that house that you were going to try to get? Yeah, no, it's way more expensive, little buddy. Where have you been for the last 10 years? You know, the real estate agent's going to look at you like you're an idiot and then move on. You know, so that's why we don't save in dollars. People who save all their money in dollars, we have a word for them, all right? We call them poor. Shout out to Michael Saylor. But that's just the truth, all right? Let me give you another example. I'm full of examples. Let's say that it is 1920. I just walked into a McDonald's, and then, of course, first off, they screamed, "What is your black monkey self doing in this McDonald's? Get out!" You know, and then they kicked me out the McDonald's, and they hit me with a water hose, okay? Then I go to the blacks-only McDonald's, right? I walk into the blacks-only McDonald's, and then I'm like, "Hey, Brett, can I get a burger for 25 cents, please?" And they're like, "Yes, sir. Give me a burger." I give them a quarter. Boom. You know what I'm saying? Then I go home. I eat my burger. I love it. Everything's good. Ba da ba ba ba. I go to sleep. And then I'm like, you know what? I'm going to cryo freeze myself. Stay with me now. I'm going to cryo freeze myself. And I'm going to wake up in the year 2025 and we'll see what's up. I'm going to eat a future burger. I wake up. Boom. 2025. I'm still black. All right. Now I can walk into the same McDonald's. God bless. I walk in there. I got a quarter. All right. Because I'm ready to eat. You feel me? I'm ready to grub. I'm ready to chow down. Boom. I'll take a burger, please. Thank you. The person at the counter looks at me like I am the worst person that they've seen all day today. They think that they're in an Instagram reel prank and they're like, once again, get out. I'm like, bro, I thought blacks were allowed here. What happened? You know? But it turns out blacks are allowed, but homeless and poor people aren't. And if you try to buy a burger with a quarter, they're going to think you're a poor person or a homeless person or an idiot or a TikToker trying to make a funny. And they're not going to give you food, right? The burger didn't really change. If anything, it got worse. You know, it's full of seed oils and poison and pink meat and, you know, deer ankles and rat cartilage. You know what I mean? So the burger actually got worse and the fries got way worse, but the price is like 100 times higher. That's kind of weird. What happened? I was saving all my money. Yeah, no, your money sucks now, little bro. Your money sucks. That's what happened. You know, your money sucks. It costs like 3 cents to produce a penny because the price of copper has just gone up so much. Pennies aren't even made out of copper anymore. They're made out of zinc mostly and like other like cheap garbage metals. And it still costs 3 cents to make a penny because the metals literally cost more. It's just, oh my gosh. Do you understand what I'm saying? Are you picking up what I'm putting down? I hope so. This is a lot of good information. Come on now. Let's be real. You got to drop a like. You got to share the video. So yeah, if you're saving all your money in cash, you're poor. That's the first thing. Then you have something like a high yield savings account. High yield. They might give you 4%, right? The reason why they're doing that is because they know they can make more than 4% while you save your money with them at the high yield savings account, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't be giving you 4%. Where does the yield come from? Where does the yield come from? They just get an extra random 4% by just holding your money? No. They get money by like investing in Lockheed Martin, who makes rockets that they then sell to Israel, right? So they can like bomb Gazans, right? They make money by selling, and buying, Palantir stock, all right? So that they can build satellite infrastructure to spy on citizens and then win government contracts, right? They make money by investing in weapons and tanks and all the other stuff. And then they might make, 20, 30%. And again, they give you your little 4% or whatever it might be. They invest in failing businesses, right? They basically prey on the downfall of businesses. They buy puts or they short businesses until they go to zero. Then they close their positions. They make massive gains. And again, they give you 4%. And it's even worse because, again, the rate of inflation is probably 7%, so they give you 4%. So you're only getting 3% poorer instead of 7% poorer. Well done. You could take your money and put it into the S&P. It's going up 7%. The rate of inflation is 7%. You're on a treadmill. You're not moving. You could take your money and put it into the Magnificent Seven. Of course, there's going to be more volatility. So if you need that money immediately, you better not have it in there. If there's a downturn or if there's tariffs or if there's torts or if there's taxes or if there's a monopoly breakup or if there is a scandal with the CEO or if there is a hearing in front of Congress or if there's any sort of controversy or if there is a failed product launch or if there is a product malfunction that kills someone or if there is anything bad like that, you're probably going to lose a lot of money for a decent amount of time. Right? But that's the risk you take when you invest in a blue chip stock. The risk is not super high, but the risks are there. And you can read all the risk in the 10K, right? The 10K is the disclosure of a public company where they go over everything that could go wrong. So they're going to break it all down for you. But of course, you're not going to read a 10K because you're not financially literate, because they didn't teach you that in school. That's a whole nother video. And because of that, you're really probably not even that savvy of an investor. You're probably just going to buy the S&P 500. Right? Now, if you think you're savvy, you're going to go on Wall Street Bets, you're going to go on Reddit, and you're going to try to find that next moonshot thing because, again, you are an investor, but really you're a trader. A trader is someone who likes to buy and sell things repeatedly. An investor is someone who has a long-term vision, tries to buy something and then hold it for a really long time. You're a trader and you're also a gambler, right? But you don't like to call it gambling. You like to call it trading or investing or whatever makes you feel better. So you go on Wall Street Bets, you go on moonshots, you go on penny stocks, and you start buying up GameStop, you start buying up AMC, you start buying up random companies that you've never even heard of before, And every now and then, maybe you get a little bit lucky and then you sell it for like a 20% profit. And then you're waiting for it to go down. Then it goes up another 100%. Then you buy back in. And then it goes down 30%. And then you get scared because now you're losing money. And then you sell that. And now you're down bad. And you're in a worse position than you were when you first started. And that's a vicious cycle, right? But then you realize that you can do that with crypto, right? You realize you can do it with crypto. It goes up even more. So then you do the exact same playbook. Same thing happens to you. You end up with less money than you had because you're not a trader. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know what's going on. You have even less money. And now you regret gambling because your once horrible life is now even worse because you have even less money now, right? Bitcoin is that solution to that problem of you having to be a gambler with your money in order for you to maintain your purchasing power. Bitcoin is that thing that you can save your money in without complicating your life or complicating your finances or complicating your investments. Bitcoin's actually very simple. You just buy it and then you hold it and then over time it goes up. I know it sounds too good to be true. I understand. But the more that you look into Bitcoin and what it actually does, what it's actually meant to do, it's meant to get you away from we all broke. It's meant to get you away from that. That is its greatest function, right? And it's continued to do that 16 years running. And it's going to continue to do that for 16 more years running. And for the reasons that I've explained in previous videos, that's why. But this was more so a rant about not being able to afford to live. You know, when you can't afford to keep up with inflation, when your job doesn't pay you to keep up with inflation, you cannot really effectively plan for kids. You can't effectively plan to buy a house. You can't effectively plan to do anything. So fiat takes your future away. Bitcoin helps you to secure a clear path for your future, right? And that's because it is predictable. It's because the monetary issuance, how many Bitcoin will there ever be? How many Bitcoin will be released on this day? How many Bitcoin will there be in total at this exact date? We can always find that out. You will never know for certain how many dollars are in circulation in the system at any given time. You will never know that. You will never know that because that record is not transparent. And also, no one's keeping track of that record. They're just printing and printing and printing and raising the debt ceiling, raising the debt ceiling, raising the debt ceiling because they have to. All right. The GDP of the United States, right, which is the gross domestic product, basically the United States income, pretty much. The GDP is way less than the amount of printing that we do. Our spending is greater than our income. That's called being insolvent, right? So if you made less money than you spent and you put it all on credit cards, that would mean that you are deeply in debt and you have no way of getting out. The only thing that you could do is get another credit card to pay off the other credit card. That's what the United States is doing, right? But it's different because we have the world reserve currency and you don't. You're just a wagee with a credit card and a spending problem. So you don't get to continually print money, right? You don't have a magic money printer. You're not a quintillionaire. You're just a normie. And because the quintillionaires have this power, they're going to continue to abuse it until people either rise up because they can't go to work and, you know, make ends meet and feed themselves anymore, or because there's something else that comes around in a sly and roundabout way that takes away the power of the bankers and all the quintillionaires, right? That sly roundabout thing is Bitcoin. It is a monetary system that exists outside of our current system that takes the power away from the bankers, away from the billionaires, away from big pharma, and it puts it into the hands of the individual. And if you want to learn more about stuff like that, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like it, check out 2 of these videos up here, right? And I'll see you guys in the next one, man. If you enjoy these rant style videos, let me know. I can keep doing them. And we can see where we go from there. Remember, stack sats or die trying.